Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we continue to have a look at the principles of training and looking at reversibility. So we'll start by having a look at the principles of training. We know that we've got progressive overload, specificity from our previous videos, and today we're going to have a look at reversibility, and the future videos will look at variety, training thresholds, and warm-up cool-down. So when we look at the concept of reversibility, we think about, well, where does this word actually come from? And we're looking at the fact it comes from the word reverse. So when we've got something happening and then we do the completely opposite of that. So when we look at that in relation to training, we're talking about the fact that when we actually stop training. So when we cease training, any gains that have been made in aerobic or anaerobic strength or flexibility training will be lost over time. This is known as the detraining effect. So, for example, when athletes return to training after the off-season, their fitness levels are usually below what they were during the previous competition season. This is why athletes often have a pre-season training program, and then which is followed then, I guess, by their full competition program. So if we have a look at the graph over here on the left, we have a look at the gains up the left-hand side, and down the bottom we've got sort of pre-season or an injury and then in-season training. So you'll see here there's some examples of how reversibility can be applied. So the pre-season, the gains are quite low, and they start training in that pre-season training, and let's just say an athlete sustains an injury and they stop training, so reversibility is applied, and therefore their gains are decreased, and they sort of stay relatively stable for quite some time. Obviously, this point here identifies that they're recovering from injury, and they're slowly working back up to full strength again, or fitness, during the season. Now, obviously, as the season tapers off or the final series are over, that's when athletes will start having what they generally call an off-season, and reversibility is applied again, and those gains are again lost. So this concept of pre-season training here allows for an increase in fitness levels which are lost in this off-season here. Now, it's important not to ramp this pre-season too quickly, because this is where injury can occur. So when we look at this concept of a decrease in gains, this is this concept of detraining. So when training stops, gains are lost over time. So, you might be really fit during your football season, and then you have a break off over summer, and when you go back to training, it's quite challenging for you, and you're not as fit as you were when you finish the season because you've lost your aerobic and anaerobic gains. So now we're going to have a look at how aerobic training and resistance training can be applied to reversibility. Now remember that aerobic training is obviously looking at our aerobic capacity, and resistance training is training like our strength training. So with aerobic training, we want to avoid lengthy disruptions to the training program. So the longer gap you have between training seasons or between exercise efforts, the greater the detraining effect will have, and it will take longer for you or an athlete to improve their performance in that pre-season period. We also need to structure phases of training appropriately, so making sure that the pre-season doesn't get ramped up too quickly, and also that during the season the training is done in phases so that an athlete can peak for performance or competition or like a final series round. If we have a look at resistance training, it's important to maintain a resistance training program throughout the year to avoid muscle atrophy. So basically the concept of losing muscle mass. So if an athlete continues to apply resistance training throughout the whole year, they will maintain their muscle mass. Remember that this is just one of the principles of training, and make sure that you have a look at the other videos in Smitty's Learning Room to make sure that you've got all 6 principles of training covered.